The seventh expert failed before breakfast. He sat at the grand piano in the Varo mansion's music room, smiled the patient smile of a man paid too much to admit he was nervous, and played the same cheerful scale every professional had played for 3 months. Do, re, mi, fa, sol. 7-year-old Nino Varo stood beside the instrument with both hands in the pockets of his gray cardigan. He did not speak, did not smile, and did not even look at the man who had arrived with leather folders, polished shoes, and a certificate framed in gold. At the far end of the room, Alessandro Varo watched his son with the stillness that made dangerous men around him careful. He wore a black suit, black shirt, and no expression, while 2 bodyguards stood near the double doors. A house manager hovered by the wall with a tablet, and a private tutor held a notebook full of failed plans. The expert tried again, softer. Do, re, mi. Nino looked at the covered windows as the expert cleared his throat. Perhaps he is resistant to structured engagement. Alessandro's jaw moved once. That means you failed, he said, and the expert's smile cracked. Mira Kline, who had been dusting the carved base of the piano, stopped with her rag in her hand, though nobody noticed her. Nobody ever noticed the maid until dust remained, water spilled, or a rich person wanted a witness who could not afford to remember. Mira had been hired by the Varo household 3 weeks earlier to polish floors, clean guest rooms, launder linen, and avoid the north music room unless summoned. Today she had been summoned because 6 experts, 3 tutors, 2 music therapists, and 1 child behavior specialist had left enough coffee rings on antique tables to require staff. The 7th expert stood. Mr. Varo, selective silence can be complex. Your son may need more time. Nino walked to the far end of the keyboard. He pressed 1 key, not loudly and not dramatically, just once. The note came out wrong, though it should have been clean, bright, and high. Instead, it came thin and sour, as if the string behind it had learned grief and forgotten pitch. Mira heard it, and her hand tightened around the dusting rag. Nino pressed the same key again, and the expert sighed. No, sweetheart, that key is broken. Let's use the middle register. Nino stepped back, and his face closed. Mira knew that closing, because children did it when adults corrected the only language they had managed to offer. He is not refusing to speak, she said. Every head turned, and the expert blinked at her. Excuse me? Mira set the dusting rag on the piano bench before she could lose her nerve. I said he is not refusing to speak. The house manager whispered, Mira. Alessandro Varo looked at her for the first time. It was not a warm look or even a curious one. It was the look of a man who had built an empire out of knowing which noise mattered and which noise could be removed. And what is my son doing? He asked. Mira swallowed. She was 30, tired, and wearing a black maid's dress that had been altered badly at the shoulders because the agency kept uniforms in 3 sizes and called discomfort discipline. Her brown hair was pinned low, her hands smelled of lemon oil, and 1 thumb had a small burn from the laundry press. She had rent due Friday, a mother who believed she worked in a hotel, and no legal reason to speak in a Mafia Boss's music room. Still, Nino's face had closed, and that mattered more. He is answering the wrong question, Mira said. The expert gave a small laugh. And you know this because you dust pianos? No, she said. Because I listen to them. Silence entered the room. Alessandro's eyes sharpened as the expert glanced at him, then back to Mira. This instrument is a Bosendorfer Imperial. It was tuned by one of the finest technicians in the city. Not recently. The expert reddened. The child is not responding because the key is out of tune. The key is not out of tune. The hammer is hitting unevenly because the old ivory cap is cracked and lifting at the front edge. The note splits when pressed gently. When pressed harder, it almost hides the split. Nino looked at her, and for the first time that morning, he looked at someone. Mira felt it like light under a door. The expert said, that is irrelevant. No, Mira said. It is the only relevant thing anyone has played. The house manager looked as if he might faint. Alessandro took 1 step forward, and the room made space for him without being told. "Explain," he said. Mira wished he had shouted, because shouting would have made him ordinary and quiet made him worse. She walked to the end of the piano and pointed to the high key Nino had touched. The ivory was old, yellowed at the edge, and cracked in a curved line like a tiny white scar. It had been polished so aggressively that the damage was nearly invisible from above. "This one," she said. "He keeps pressing this one." "He presses many keys," the expert said. "No. He touches many keys when people ask. He chooses this one when they stop asking." Nino's fingers moved inside his pockets. Mira noticed. Alessandro noticed her noticing. "Why?" he asked. Mira leaned closer to the broken ivory key. "Because it answers back." The expert laughed again. "Keys do not answer." "Then you have not spent enough time alone with broken instruments." One of the bodyguards looked down. Maybe he was hiding a smile. Mira pressed the cracked key gently, and the wrong note trembled in the room. Nino's eyes lifted when she pressed it again, then waited. Nino reached one small hand toward the keyboard, hesitated, and pressed the same broken ivory key with one finger. The sour note answered hers. Mira pressed a neighboring key, then the broken one, then the neighboring key again. 3 notes, not a song yet, but a question. Nino stared at the keys, then pressed the broken one twice, and Mira's chest tightened. The expert crossed his arms. "This is mimicry." "No," Mira said, still looking at Nino. "It is a pattern." Alessandro's voice was very soft. "What pattern?" Mira did not answer immediately. She pressed the broken key once, then a lower key with her left hand. Nino's shoulders changed. Not relaxed, exactly, but less locked. "He is marking a sound he recognizes," she said. Alessandro's face went still. "From where?" Mira looked at the covered windows, the silent walls, the piano that had been polished and ignored at the same time. "From before the house went quiet. Nobody breathed properly after that." The private tutor closed her notebook. The expert looked offended in the way professionals looked offended when truth entered without credentials. Alessandro moved closer to his son. Nino stepped away. The movement was small, but it landed hard. Alessandro stopped so abruptly that the bodyguards behind him stopped too. Mira saw his face before he repaired it. Pain. Then pride. Then control. "Nino," Alessandro said. Nino looked at the floor. The old piano sat between them like a country with a closed border. Mira placed both hands on her apron. "May I try something?" The house manager whispered her name again, this time like a prayer for employment. Alessandro did not look away from his son. "If you frighten him, you leave." "If you frighten him, I leave too," Mira said. The room froze. Alessandro turned his head slowly, and the expert inhaled through his teeth. Mira's knees understood, at once, that they belonged to a woman who should have stayed silent. But her mouth had been raised in a church basement, a repair shop, and a dying mother's kitchen. It had learned that respect without honesty was just fear wearing clean shoes. "He steps back when you come forward," she said. "You may not mean to frighten him, but the room does not care what you mean. It cares what he feels." For a moment, Alessandro Varo looked at her as if the world had offered him 2 choices, punish the maid or listen to her. He chose neither. He looked at his son, then stepped back, and Nino's shoulders dropped half an inch. Mira saw it, and so did Alessandro. That half-inch did more damage to the expert's authority than any insult could have done. Mira sat on the edge of the piano bench, leaving space between herself and Nino. She did not ask him to sit or tell him he was safe, because children who had heard that too often knew adults used safe for rooms they controlled. Instead, she played the broken ivory key once, then waited. Nino pressed it once, she played the low key again, and he answered with the broken key. She added a 3rd note, one that made the broken tone sound less lonely. Nino's lips parted, and Alessandro's hand tightened at his side, but Mira did not look at him. Looking at fathers during delicate moments often made them enter the moment too loudly. She played the three-note pattern again, Nino answered, and then he whispered one word. Mama. The room did not move. Even the dust seemed to stop falling. Alessandro's face changed so violently and so quietly that Mira almost looked away. He had money, power, men, gates, vehicles, loyalty bought and loyalty earned. None of it prepared him for one small word spoken beside a broken ivory key. Nino looked terrified of what he had done. Mira knew the next few seconds would decide whether he ever tried again. I heard you, she said gently. Not good boy, not finally, not say it again. Just, I heard you. Nino stared at her. May I play it back? She asked. He gave the smallest nod. Mira played the broken key, then the low note, then the broken key again. Mama, she said, matching the rhythm instead of the words pain. Nino touched the key with 2 fingers. Mama, he whispered again. Alessandro turned away, only half an inch, enough to hide his face from his men but not enough to hide from Mira. The expert began gathering his folders with shaking hands. This is not a standard protocol, he muttered. No, Mira said. It is listening. Alessandro looked back. Everyone out, he said. Nino flinched, Mira lifted one finger without thinking, and Alessandro stopped mid-command. That was the second time the whole room changed. Please, Mira said quietly, not like that. Alessandro's eyes held hers. He had the kind of temper that did not need volume. It lived in the air around him, sharpening the furniture. But he looked at Nino, saw the boy's fingers retreat from the key, and swallowed the command before it could become another locked door. The session is over, he said. Leave us. Better. The expert left first, offended enough to walk quickly and frightened enough not to slam anything. The tutor followed, the house manager backed out as if the carpet might accuse him, and the bodyguards remained because dangerous households confused presence with care. Mira looked at them, and Alessandro saw. Enzo, Hall. The tallest guard hesitated. Outside, Alessandro corrected. The men left, but Nino stayed beside the piano. Mira stood slowly. I should go back to work. No, Alessandro said. Nino's shoulders tightened, and Alessandro caught it this time. He closed his eyes for 1 second. Will you stay? He asked. Mira did not expect the question to affect her, but it did. Power asking instead of taking always sounded strange the first time. Strange did not mean safe, but it was better than being dragged by a decision already made. She looked at Nino. Would you like me to stay for 5 minutes? Nino did not answer with words. He pressed the broken ivory key once, and Mira nodded. 5 minutes. Alessandro stood at the far side of the room and did not move closer. It cost him, Mira could see that. Men like him believed action was love, and restraint felt like abandonment until someone taught them otherwise. Nino pressed the key again, and Mira answered with a low note. For 5 minutes, the Varo mansion listened to a child speak without sentences. Afterward, Nino left with his nanny for breakfast. He did not speak again, but he touched the piano bench before he went, as if promising the room he might return. Mira picked up her dusting rag while Alessandro remained by the covered windows. Who taught you that? He asked. My father tuned church pianos, she said. My mother cleaned the church. I learned both sides of a room. You are a maid. Yes. And a piano tuner? No. Piano tuners are paid more. His mouth did not smile, but something in his eyes moved. What are you, then? Mira folded the rag once. Someone who grew up under instruments men praised while women cleaned beneath them. He looked at the broken ivory key. My wife played that piano. There it was, not information but a wound with a name. Mira had known there was a dead mother in the room long before anyone said it. Children carried absence in patterns, widowers carried it in rules, and houses carried it in dust gathered around things nobody had permission to touch. What was her name? Mira asked. Alessandro's jaw tightened. Serena. Did she play that key? She played everything. The words came too hard. Mira softened her voice without making it sweet. Then maybe he is not pressing a broken key. Maybe he is pressing the only part of her this house still lets answer. Alessandro looked at her. For the first time, his power did not enter the space before he did. Only grief. I ordered the piano locked after she died, he said. Mira glanced at the uncovered keys. You did not lock it. I banned music. Same thing, if you are a child. His hand flexed once. She waited for anger. He gave her honesty. I could not hear it. Mira understood that more than she wanted to. After her father died, she had wrapped his tuning fork in a dish towel and hidden it in a cereal tin. For months, even the smallest clear tone made her feel as if grief had found a door under her ribs. That does not mean Nino could not hear it, she said. Alessandro turned toward the covered windows. Morning light pushed through the edges of the curtains, trying to enter a room designed to keep memory dim. He has not spoken in 3 months. He spoke today. Because of you. Because someone finally answered the key. He looked back at her. You keep removing yourself from the miracle. It is not a miracle, Mr. Varo. It is work. That landed. Mira saw it. She had learned, painfully, that rich people loved calling women skill, instinct, gift, magic, grace, anything except labor. Magic did not require fair wages. Grace did not need a contract. Instinct could be praised and dismissed in the same breath. Alessandro studied her as if she had opened a drawer in his mind and found something he had misplaced. What would the work require, he asked. Mira almost laughed. For me? Permission not to be fired for speaking. Granted. Written permission. His eyebrows moved. You do not trust me. I do not know you. You know what I am. That is why I want it written. For a moment, the room held the shape of danger. Then Alessandro nodded. What else? Nino decides when the piano is open. Nobody asks him to perform. Nobody says finally when he speaks. Nobody repeats mama at him until the word turns into a trick. Alessandro looked toward the door where his son had gone. And me? You sit down before you speak to him. The instruction seemed to strike him personally. Sit down. Yes. In my own house. Especially there. The corner of his mouth moved, not amusement exactly. More like a man discovering that being insulted by someone competent was less irritating than being comforted by fools. Anything else, Miss Kline? Mira. He paused. Mira. Her name in his mouth felt dangerous, not because it was intimate, but because he said it as if he had decided to remember. You also need a tuner, she said. I can bring one by noon. Not one who only hears expensive wood. One who will listen to the child before adjusting the instrument. Do you know such a person? Yes. Who? Me, with supervision from the old man who taught me after my father died. You said you were not a tuner. I said tuners are paid more. I did not say I was useless. For one brief second, Alessandro Varo almost smiled. Then the door opened. Nino stood there with the nanny behind him. In his hand was a small wooden toy car. He walked to the piano, placed the toy car beneath the broken ivory key, and looked at Mira. Alessandro started to move. Mira's glance stopped him. He caught himself. Nino pressed the broken key once. Mira answered with a low note. Then Nino whispered, blue. Mira looked at the toy car. It was blue. Alessandro's breath left him as if someone had opened a sealed room. Blue, Mira repeated softly. Nino touched the car. Mama blue. Mira went very still. Alessandro's face lost color. Serena's car was blue, he said. Nino looked at the covered windows again. Mira followed his gaze. The windows overlooked the north drive, where a fountain stood dry beneath stone angels. A memory stirred at the edge of her professional mind, not hers but made from pieces children left when adults thought they were silent. Did he see something there? She asked. Alessandro's expression closed. No. You answered too fast. The nanny took one step back. Alessandro's eyes turned cold. My wife died away from this house. Nino pressed the broken key hard. The sour note cracked. Mira did not look away from Alessandro. He disagrees. That was when the morning stopped being only about speech. The old music room had become a door, and the child had found the handle. Alessandro sent for breakfast, but nobody ate much. Nino sat at the small round table near the windows with toast, berries, and a cup of milk. Mira sat on the carpet 3 feet away, not too close, cleaning a music stand with a cloth so no one could accuse her of hovering. Alessandro sat in an armchair because Mira had pointed to it and said, "There." He had obeyed. The bodyguards pretended not to notice. Nino drove the blue toy car along the piano bench. Every time it reached the broken ivory key, he stopped and pressed the note once. Then he looked toward the north drive. Mira wrote the pattern on a napkin. Key, car, window. Key, car, window. Children often told stories in loops when they did not trust adults to hold the whole truth at once. Alessandro watched the napkin. What does that mean? It means he is giving us the same 3 things in the same order. Can you ask him? I can, but not like an interrogation. I know how to question people. That is what worries me. Enzo, the lead bodyguard, coughed into his fist. Alessandro did not look away from Mira. Proceed. Mira turned to Nino. I see the blue car. Nino pushed it forward. I hear the broken key. He pressed it. I see the window. He looked. She waited. The room waited with her, though some of the men did it badly. Nino slid off his chair and walked to the covered windows. He did not open the curtains. Instead, he touched the hem of the heavy velvet panel and looked at his father. Alessandro's hand moved. Mira's voice stopped him. Ask. He inhaled. Would you like the curtain open? Alessandro asked. Nino shook his head. Mira nodded, as if no were a perfectly useful answer. Do you want to show us the curtain? Nino touched the inner lining. Mira crossed the room slowly, staying low enough that he could see her hands. The curtain lining was blue silk, faded where sunlight had once touched it. Near the bottom edge, several threads had been pulled loose. Nino touched one thread. Mama Blue, he whispered. Alessandro stood too quickly. Nino retreated. Alessandro stopped. This time, he sat back down without being told. Mira looked at the pulled threads. They were not random. Someone had stitched the lining by hand, years ago, and hidden a narrow pocket inside the seam. The pocket had been opened recently by small fingers. May I? Mira asked Nino. He nodded. She slid 2 fingers into the lining and found a folded strip of paper. Alessandro's body went dangerously still. Mira did not hand it to him immediately. She unfolded it enough to see a line of music notes drawn in blue ink, then a sentence in a woman's hand. For Nino, when the house forgets how to sing. Mira's throat tightened. Alessandro crossed the room on instinct. Nino stepped back again. The pain on Alessandro's face was raw enough to be indecent. Sit, Mira said. He looked at her. Please, she added, because power was not the only thing that needed training. Alessandro sat on the carpet. Not in the chair. On the carpet, at his son's height. Every man in the room found something else to look at. Nino did not run. Mira handed the paper to Alessandro, but only after Nino touched it first. Alessandro accepted it with both hands. Serena wrote this, he said. His voice had no armor left. Nino pressed the broken ivory key from across the room. One sour note. Alessandro looked at his son. For a moment, he was not the most feared man in the house. He was a father holding a message he should have found sooner. Mira sat beside the piano bench and let the silence do its work. That was the quiet turn. Not because the room became gentle, but because Alessandro Varo finally stopped trying to force speech out of his son and began to understand that Nino had been speaking for months through every object the house had ordered quiet. He is not refusing to speak, Mira said softly. He is refusing to speak where nobody listens. Alessandro closed his eyes. The paper trembled once between his hands. I thought music hurt him, he said. No. Music was where he still found her. Nino walked toward him with the blue toy car. Alessandro did not reach. He waited. Nino placed the car beside his father's knee. Mama sang, he whispered. Alessandro bowed his head. Yes, he said. She did. Nino touched the paper. Again. Alessandro looked at Mira, lost in a way that had nothing to do with power. He wants the song, she said. I do not remember it. The paper does. Mira took the strip, studied the blue notes, and played them with one hand. The melody was simple, unfinished, and tender enough to make the covered room feel suddenly too small for all the grief inside it. At the last note, the broken ivory key answered wrong. Nino smiled. It was tiny. It was real. Alessandro saw it, and the world rearranged around that single expression. For the rest of the morning, the mansion behaved as if it had been given instructions in a language it did not understand. The curtains remained half-closed because Nino wanted them that way. The piano stayed open. The experts were not invited back. The bodyguards learned to stand farther from the music room door. The house manager produced a written permission note for Mira that included the words consultation, child-led musical communication, and no disciplinary action for verbal correction during sessions. Mira read it twice. This says temporary. Alessandro stood beside the piano, no longer close enough to crowd Nino. It can be amended. It says my agency remains my employer. That can be amended too. Careful, she said. That sounds like buying me. His gaze held hers. What would hiring you sound like? A job description. A salary. Hours. Authority to say no. No men outside my apartment. No gifts delivered without asking. No calling me special when you mean useful. Enzo looked at the ceiling. Alessandro nodded once. Claudia will draft it. Claudia? My lawyer. Does she know you need this much supervision? This time Alessandro smiled. Not much. Enough to change the air. She suspects. Mira looked away first, annoyed by the warmth that moved through her chest. Attraction to dangerous men was not a life plan. It was a hazard, like wet marble or rich guests with opinions. Nino saved her by pressing the broken key again. Blue, he said. Yes, Mira answered. Blue. Alessandro's smile vanished into something deeper. He said it again. Do not count them in front of him. Right. And don't make that face. What face? The one where you look like his words belong to you. That one hurt. She saw it land, and for a second she regretted the sharpness. Then Nino pressed the key again and watched his father from under his lashes. Alessandro lowered himself back into the chair. Thank you, he said, not to Mira but to Nino. Nino considered this, then pushed the blue car across the carpet toward his father. By afternoon, the blue note had become a map. Serena Varo had hidden more than one message in the music room. A folded staff paper in the curtain lining led to a loose screw beneath the piano's music rack. Behind it, Mira found a tiny brass cylinder wrapped in blue silk thread. Inside the cylinder was a second paper, written in the same blue ink. If Alessandro has closed the room, open the old bench. Alessandro read it once and went silent. There is no old bench, Enzo said. Mira looked at the piano bench beneath her. Not this one. Alessandro's face changed. The chapel bench. The Varo mansion had a private chapel at the east end, though nobody called it a chapel anymore. They called it the East Sitting Room because grief had made certain words inconvenient. Serena had practiced there when Nino was a baby. Alessandro had not entered it since her memorial service. Nino heard chapel and pressed the broken key twice. He knows, Mira said. Alessandro looked at his son. Do you want to go there? Nino took the blue car and held it against his chest, not yes and not no, but enough. They went slowly. Mira walked with Nino while Alessandro walked several feet behind, because he had learned more in one morning than some men learned in a lifetime and was trying not to forget it under pressure. Enzo followed at a distance, and the house manager trailed them with the expression of a man watching job descriptions dissolve. The east sitting room smelled of beeswax, old flowers, and air that had not been moved enough. A small upright piano stood under a sheet. Beside it was a carved wooden bench with a blue cushion, faded nearly gray. Nino stopped at the door, and his fingers tightened around the toy car. Mira crouched beside him, not blocking his view. Do you want to look from here? He nodded, so they looked from the doorway. Alessandro stood behind them, every line of him pulled tight. I had the room closed, he said. Mira did not soften the truth for him. He noticed. He was 4. Children notice closed doors. Nino pressed the toy car against Mira's hand, and she accepted it like a serious document. May I go in? She asked him. He nodded again, and Mira entered the room and lifted the sheet from the upright piano. Dust rose. The instrument was smaller, warmer, and less perfect than the grand piano in the music room. Its keys were yellowed, its pedals worn, and one corner held the faint scratches of a child who had once stood too close with a toy. The bench opened with a soft wooden sigh, and inside were scarves, sheet music, a photograph of Serena holding baby Nino, and a small recorder wrapped in blue cloth. Alessandro made a sound that was not a word, and Nino stepped into the room. Mira held up the recorder. May I? Nino looked at his father. Alessandro did not answer for him, which was good. Nino nodded. The recorder crackled when Mira pressed play. For a moment there was only static, and then a woman's voice filled the closed room, warm, amused, and close enough to feel alive. Nino, if Papa has locked the music away, you must forgive him slowly. He thinks quiet keeps people safe. Alessandro turned toward the window while Mira kept the recorder steady, and Serena's voice continued. But you and I know quiet is only useful when someone is listening inside it. Press the bright broken key if you need him to remember. He will be stubborn. You may need to press it more than once. Nino smiled at that, and Alessandro covered his mouth with one hand. And Alessandro, Serena said, her voice softening, if you are hearing this because our son found a braver person than you, listen to them. Enzo looked away, and the house manager suddenly studied the wall. Mira stared at the recorder in her hand and wished, desperately, that dead women would stop being so accurate. Do not make our child earn your gentleness, Serena said. Give it first. Let him answer when he can. The recording ended with 3 piano notes, low note, broken key, low note. Nino walked to the upright piano and played the same rhythm badly but clearly, then looked at Alessandro. Papa, he said. Alessandro sat on the chapel floor before his knees could fail him. He did not grab his son or demand the word again, he placed one hand on the floor, palm up, halfway between them. Nino looked at the hand, then put the blue toy car in it. Mira turned away, but not fast enough to miss Alessandro's face as the dangerous man broke open without making a sound. Later, when Nino slept on a sofa in the east sitting room with the blue car tucked under his hand, Alessandro found Mira in the music room. She was examining the broken ivory key with a small lamp, a strip of felt, and a toolkit borrowed from the house maintenance closet. Her agency would be furious if they knew she was repairing instead of cleaning. Then again, her agency had been furious about many things that improved the world. You should rest, Alessandro said. So should you. I do not rest easily. That is not the same as not needing it. He came closer, then stopped before his shadow covered the keys, and Mira noticed. You're learning. Slowly. Slowly is allowed. He looked at the broken ivory key. Can it be repaired? Yes. But not replaced. Why? Because he chose this sound. If you make it perfect overnight, you erase the bridge he built. Alessandro absorbed that. How do we fix it without erasing it? Mira heard the word and pretended she did not. Stabilize the crack. Clean the lifted edge. Tune the hammer enough that it does not worsen. Leave the split tone until Nino chooses another sound. Alessandro nodded. And me? She looked up. What do I stabilize? He asked. That was too honest for the hour. The mansion was quiet around them, but not dead quiet anymore. Somewhere down the hall, a staff member laughed softly. Someone had opened a window, and the covered room had begun to breathe. You start with apology, Mira said. To Nino. Yes. For closing the music room. For making grief a rule everyone had to obey. He closed his eyes. And then? Then you ask him what he wants open. Alessandro looked at her with the full force of his attention, and Mira understood why people mistook it for possession. Being seen by him felt like standing in a circle of heat. It would be easy, dangerously easy, to confuse that heat with safety. So she stepped back. He noticed and did not follow. Thank you, she said. For what? For not turning a feeling into a command. I have excellent supervision. Temporary supervision, she reminded him. That can be amended. Maybe. The word made his gaze flicker, not with triumph but with hope. Mira returned to the key. Hold the lamp lower. He did. Not there. You'll cast a shadow. He moved. Better. For 20 minutes, the Mafia boss held a lamp while the maid stabilized the broken ivory key that had taught his son to speak. No one entered or interrupted, and no one in the house would have believed it if they had not seen the light under the door. When the repair was done, Mira pressed the key. The note still split slightly, not sour now but tender, and Alessandro listened. It sounds wounded, he said. It sounds alive. He looked at her, and Mira did not look away. You should go home, he said at last. I should. May I arrange a car? You may ask if I want one. He breathed through something that might once have become impatience. Do you want a car? She thought of the late bus, her aching feet, the agency supervisor who would call before dawn, and the mother she still had not told about the Varo mansion. Yes. May I have Enzo drive you? No. Enzo, outside the door, made a wounded sound. Mira almost smiled. A household driver. Not a bodyguard. Alessandro nodded. A household driver. And no one follows. That one cost him, and she watched the cost pass across his face. No one follows, he said. Good. At the front steps, the night air smelled of wet stone and cut grass. The black gate stood open. A sedan waited at the drive, its headlights low. Alessandro walked her to the car but stopped several feet from the door. Mira. She turned. He held out a folded paper. Written permission, he said. Temporary, as you requested. Claudia will draft the proper version. Mira took it. The paper stated that she had authority to speak during Nino's music sessions, refuse unsafe instructions, and pause any adult who interfered with child-led communication. It was the least romantic document anyone had ever handed her. It made her chest ache anyway. Thank you, she said. You earned it. That is better than giving it. I am learning the difference. She opened the car door. Behind them, from an upstairs window, one small note sounded. The broken ivory key, then another note, lower. Mira looked up. Nino stood at the music room window with the nanny behind him. He lifted one hand, not waving exactly, but showing he knew she was leaving. Mira lifted her hand back. Alessandro watched his son. He is speaking, he said. Yes. Not always in words. Now you are listening. He looked at her then. The night gathered around the space between them. Will you come tomorrow? He asked. For Nino's session. For Nino's session, he agreed. And the piano. And the piano. Not for you. He accepted that with a grace that made her more wary, not less. Not yet, he said. Mira should have corrected him. She should have said never, or do not presume, or remember who signs my checks. But honesty had already caused enough trouble in that house, and she had never been good at wasting it. Ask properly another day, she said. Alessandro's mouth softened. I will. The car pulled away. Mira returned the next morning with 3 hours of sleep, one clean blouse, and the written permission folded inside her coat like a passport into a country that had not decided whether to honor its borders. The Varo mansion looked different in daylight after music had entered it. Not friendly, never friendly, but less sealed. The curtains in the north music room were open halfway. A strip of pale sun touched the piano bench. Nino sat on the carpet with the blue toy car beside his knee, arranging wooden blocks in a careful line from the doorway to the piano. Alessandro sat in the armchair Mira had assigned him the day before, reading a folder without pretending not to watch his son. He stood when Mira entered. Nino's shoulders tightened. Alessandro saw it and sat back down. Mira stopped in the doorway and looked at him. Good morning, she said. Good morning, he answered. That was almost graceful. I practiced before you arrived. Nino pressed the broken ivory key once. Mira smiled at him. Good morning to you too. The note still split slightly, tender and uneven, but it no longer sounded abandoned. The felt she had placed beneath the lifted ivory had held through the night. The crack remained visible if someone knew where to look, which was the point. A perfect key would have pleased adults. The broken key still belonged to Nino. That distinction became necessary 20 minutes later when the famous tuner arrived. His name was Cedric Lorne. He wore a camel coat, cream gloves, and the expression of a man who had been praised by wealthy families for so long that he believed furniture leaned toward him out of respect. He entered with 2 assistants, a leather tool case, and a replacement ivory-style cap wrapped in blue paper. Mira saw the blue paper first. So did Nino. The boy slid the toy car under his leg. Cedric looked at the piano, then at Mira's maid uniform, and did not bother hiding his disappointment. Who attempted the temporary repair? Mira raised one hand. Ah, he said. It was a small sound. It contained a whole education in class. Alessandro looked up from his chair. Choose your next word carefully. Cedric adjusted his gloves. I only mean the key should be restored properly before the damage affects the action. Children become attached to flaws, but a flaw is still a flaw. Nino's hand moved toward the broken key. Mira stepped between Cedric and the piano before Alessandro could speak. Do not replace it. Cedric blinked. Excuse me? You can stabilize the action, clean the bridge pin, and check the hammer alignment. You cannot replace the broken ivory key. And you are? The person Mr. Varo authorized to pause any adult who interferes with child-led communication. Enzo, standing near the door, looked profoundly satisfied by the sentence. Cedric turned to Alessandro. Mr. Varo, surely you do not intend to let household staff dictate instrument restoration. Alessandro did not rise. That alone made the room feel altered. Mira, he said, why should the key remain? Not is she right? Not explain yourself to him. He asked her. Mira felt the difference all the way down to her tired feet. Because Nino uses that split tone as a reference point, she said. His mother left instructions around that exact sound. If you replace it before he chooses another anchor, You take the first bridge he trusted and make it disappear. Cedric folded his hands. With respect, grief should not be built into an instrument. It already is. A piano should be brought back to purity. Children are not pure-tone machines. One assistant coughed. Alessandro's mouth almost moved. Cedric flushed. This is sentimental. No, Mira said. Sentimental would be preserving the crack because it makes adults cry. Practical is preserving the sound because a child uses it to communicate. Nino pressed the key. The room listened. Mira turned to him. Do you want Mr. Lorne to make that note sound different today? Nino shook his head. Cedric said, he may not understand the question. Nino looked at him. Then, very clearly, he said, no replace. Nobody moved. Mira kept her face calm because sudden celebration could turn a child's courage into performance. Alessandro gripped the arms of his chair hard enough that the leather creaked, but he stayed seated. No replace, Mira repeated. Nino nodded. Alessandro looked at Cedric. There is your instruction. From the child? From my son. The correction landed like a door closing. Cedric's assistant stared at their tool case. Mira softened the edge of her voice, not for Cedric but for Nino. You may still help if you can work around the key. Cedric took a breath through his nose. I can regulate the hammer and secure the cap without replacing it. Then do that. He looked to Alessandro again. Alessandro looked at Nino. Would you like him to fix the part underneath while keeping your key? Nino considered this with solemn attention. Then he placed the blue toy car on the piano bench, as if the car could supervise. Yes, he said. That yes did not shatter the room like Mama had. It changed it more quietly. It proved the first word had not been a door that opened once and vanished. It was a hinge now, stiff but moving. Cedric worked for 40 minutes under Mira's eye and Nino's suspicious silence. Alessandro remained seated until Nino invited him closer by pushing the blue car toward his shoe. Only then did he move to the carpet. He sat badly. Mafia bosses, Mira discovered, did not fold easily. Nino noticed too. Papa Big. Enzo turned his face toward the window. Alessandro looked helplessly at Mira, as if fatherhood had produced a translation problem. He is saying you look uncomfortable, she said. I am. Nino touched his father's knee. Sit small. Alessandro adjusted, lowering one shoulder and crossing his legs with visible effort. Better? He asked. Nino studied him. Less big. Mira looked down at the piano keys because smiling too openly felt like intruding. The second test came after lunch. The house manager, Mr. Bellant, arrived with a clipboard and a face full of administrative concern. He waited until Nino was in the garden with his nanny before speaking, which told Mira he had been in expensive houses long enough to fear children's timing. Mr. Varo, he said, regarding Miss Kline's involvement, the agency contract may create complications. She is not vetted for family advisory work. Mira kept polishing the music rack. Alessandro said, Claudia is reviewing it. Of course. I only worry about boundaries. Mira looked up. Whose? Bellant blinked. Because yesterday no one worried about boundaries when 7 experts entered this room and tried to make a child perform grief on schedule. Alessandro looked at her. She did not apologize. Bellant's cheeks colored. That is not what occurred. It is exactly what occurred, but with better shoes. Enzo made a sound behind his hand. Bellant recovered. Miss Kline, the concern is that staff can become attached to family narratives. It may confuse the boy. Nino, Mira said. Pardon? His name is Nino. The clipboard lowered a fraction. Alessandro stood then, slowly enough not to startle anyone and deliberately enough to make Bellant remember whose house he served. For 1 second, Mira thought he would take over. Instead, he looked at her. Do you want to answer him, or do you want me to? That question was its own kind of romance. Not flowers. Not a hand at her waist. Authority offered back to the woman who had earned it. I will answer, Mira said. Alessandro nodded and stayed quiet. Bellant looked less comfortable than Cedric had. Good. Attachment is not the danger, Mira said. Control disguised as care is the danger. Nino does not need adults who stay unattached. He needs adults who do not make their feelings heavier than his. Bellant's mouth tightened. You speak boldly for someone on a temporary household assignment. I listened carefully for someone nobody expected to hear anything. The room went still. Alessandro's eyes moved from Bellant to Mira, and she felt his attention again, hot, exact, not possessive yet but capable of becoming so if she stopped correcting him. So she corrected him before he needed it. Do not enjoy that too much, she told him. His eyebrows lifted. Enjoy what? Watching me win arguments you should have prevented. Enzo studied the ceiling with devotion. Alessandro accepted the hit. Fair. Bellant looked between them as if the hierarchy had developed a crack he could not polish over. By evening, Claudia arrived with the amended contract. She was a narrow woman in a charcoal suit, silver hair cut at her jaw, and eyes that suggested she had survived 3 decades of powerful men by billing them for the privilege of being corrected. Miss Kline, she said, placing the papers on the piano bench. Mr. Varo asked for a clean appointment. I wrote one despite his first 3 drafts being sentimental nonsense. Alessandro looked out the window. Mira turned a page. The position was titled Child-Led Music Communication Consultant. It included salary, hours, authority, confidentiality boundaries, independent transportation, and a clause stating that no member of the Varo household could characterize emotional labor as a gift in place of payment. Mira looked at Claudia. You wrote that last part. With pleasure. I like you. Most intelligent women do. Nino ran and then stopped himself from running too close to the piano, and placed 3 objects on the bench, the blue toy car, Serena's folded music strip, and a small yellow block. Mira crouched. Is this a song or a map? Nino thought. Both. Alessandro sat on the carpet without being told. Mira saw it. Nino saw it too. The boy touched the yellow block. Sunroom. Alessandro looked at the east hallway. The conservatory, he said. Mama plants. His voice remained soft, but it did not vanish. Mira looked at Alessandro. Did Serena keep plants there? Yes. After Nino was born. Is the room closed? Alessandro closed his eyes. Yes. Mira waited. He opened them and looked at his son. Would you like to show us the sunroom tomorrow? Nino pressed the broken ivory key. Then he said, open. 1 word. The whole house seemed to hear it. Alessandro bowed his head, not in defeat, but in the first shape of obedience that did not humiliate anyone. Open, he said. Mira signed the contract after reading every page twice. Alessandro did not rush her. Claudia approved of that. When the ink dried, Nino pressed the broken ivory key 3 times, then played the low note Mira had used to answer him the first morning. Mira answered with the next note. Alessandro listened from the carpet, not the chair. The song was still incomplete. So were they. But for once, nobody in the Varo mansion mistook incomplete for broken beyond use. Mira looked down at the written permission in her lap, then at the old dust caught under her fingernails, then at the faint line of ivory powder on her sleeve from the broken key. Poor girls were always told they should be grateful when powerful men noticed them. Mira knew better. The real miracle was not being noticed. It was being heard without having to become smaller. Behind her, in the Varo mansion, 1 broken ivory key sounded again. This time, the house did not silence it. If you were in that music room, what would stay with you most, the broken ivory key, Nino's first word, or Alessandro learning to sit down and listen?